In a talk I gave yesterday titled The Left and the Right Are Both Wrong, I mentioned just the craziness of the world and how a lot of people will call the world crazy, but they won't identify like what the exact root cause of it is. And I was attempting to make clear that when you understand that slavery is craziness, like in other words, being a slave is an experience of craziness, right? There's no sense to it. When you're dealing with your slave master, there's not going to be any sound reasoning going on, right? It's just going to be arbitrary abuse, right? In various ways. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just craziness. If you're looking for things to make sense in a sense of like what would be productive and promoting well-being, you're not going to find it under a condition of slavery. And so you might just say, this is crazy, right? The world is crazy. But it's not really the reality. It's reality within the confines of being a slave that makes you know your experience of reality continually disturbing and unpleasant, and makes your observation be just one crazy thing after another, because you're expecting to see sanity within the context of slavery, and that's impossible. I hope this is not too philosophical or theoretical because it to your ears, because it really is seeing through all of the externalities that we're facing, and seeing, well, what is the root cause of this? Again, our reality actually has an ethical fabric to it. There's an ethical fabric to creation, and that's because it was created by a divinity who very much is concerned with ethics. And so that's why there's certain ethical laws, you could say, namely to not make it confusing, like as often as done. We just throw on the letter S, like human rights or natural laws, as if there's this kind of mysterious unknown number of them, unknown quantity. Really, it just comes down to, like I was saying in the previous talk, and I've said before in other talks, the fundamental knowledge of good and evil that reality is based on, and which was communicated directly by the Son of God, by Yeshua the Messiah, by Jesus the Christ, as the greatest commandments, which is comprehensive love, love towards God, others, and yourself, which in other words is comprehensive love. It's love towards every person or being you could express it toward. And the opposite of befriending love is abuse. And so people keep thinking that there's an exception to this rule, and that's basically how tyranny has always operated, namely by trying to convince you that in the name of safety, it's okay to be abusive. And so people accept abuse, accept slavery, and reject that fundamental ethic, which we could just call the law of love or the non-abuse principle. And then they wonder why the world is so messed up. And people are continually deceived into thinking that there are exceptions, especially the safety exception, the supposed exception of safety being more important than being non-abusive. And so you have people that are really just fools and don't realize that they're being fooled. For example, in the whole gun control debate, where you have groups like, I think they're called like Moms Demand Action, who have this very simple minded view that if the government simply bans all guns, then there will not be any more gun violence, because in order to carry out violence with a gun, you need to be able to legally purchase one. And so, therefore, no one will be able to have one anymore. And so, poof, there goes violence. That's the ridiculously simplistic thinking that they hold, which, of course, neglects the fact that criminals, acquire firearms through non legal means. Point number one, that somehow they're incapable of processing in their brain. And point number two being that the idea that governments having all the guns would make the world safer is not actually based on logic or truth or history or ethics. It's just an appeal to authority. It's just this naive idol worship. Like, oh, of course, if the authorities are the only ones that have the guns, then guns will only be used for good things because authorities are perfectly good. They're trustworthy. They're my God. They're my idol that I worship every day, and they're constrained by the rule of law. This is the fantasy land that the statist lives in, that they think is actually, you know, on solid ground in the real world. Again, having zero history or actual, like, present day observation to back it up, to back up this idea that they are the most trustworthy. And so, therefore, if they have all the guns, we'll be safer. As if, like, violence towards people by governments with weapons has never happened. Like, it's just the most ridiculous claim you could, one of the most ridiculous claims you could ever make. You just have to be completely delusional um, to hold that belief. But again, it comes down to believing there are exceptions to the rule, right? It's okay for governments to disarm nonviolent people, which is actually an abusive act, right? Because if you were to just disarm your neighbor just because you felt like it and make them defenseless, that's actually abusive, clearly. And that's why it's not legal for one neighbor to do that to another neighbor, right? Because it's wrong. But people are dumb in that they think, well, if the authorities do it, that's different. Right? Again, it's just this idol worship that supposedly cancels the moral law of the universe, the moral law of creation. So, Patrick Henry was one of the men called the founding fathers of the United States. And what's interesting about Patrick Henry is that he is given some, like, the least recognition, even though he was the greatest champion of, like, the Declaration of Independence, of the Bill of Rights, of everything basically that makes government, makes the United States better than other countries, is in large part thanks to the words and work of Patrick Henry. And yet he is not given the acknowledgement that other, so-called founding fathers are, like George Washington. Just look at the cash money that we got. There's no Patrick Henry on any of the bills, right? It's George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, right? Thomas Jefferson on the $2 bill. Benjamin Franklin. No Patrick Henry. But back in the day, Patrick Henry was recognized as, like, again, the founding father, like the number one person that really, enabled a more free country from manifesting. And he warned against. He was actually against the Constitution that was being formed, because he recognized, well, this is just going to end up being just like the tyranny that we're fighting against now. It's just going to keep, increasing their wealth and power at the federal level, and they're just going to become another, despotic, tyrannical government. He predicted that, and that's exactly what happened. And he called out specific loopholes in the Constitution, which, in other words, are supposed exceptions to the rule, right? So the basic idea then was, and he communicated this exactly, is that if you give them this power to be abusive, you're just going to end up being a slave. So that's why, the main idea was liberty. In other words, freedom from abuse, right? So he was against any loopholes or means to circumvent that law of liberty, the law of love, the non-abuse principle, and called them out when he saw that they were introducing that language into the new Constitution, right? So it's still there right now. You can just look in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. It says that the government has powers to pass any laws they deem necessary and proper. That's a giant loophole. All they have to do is say, well, we think it's proper, and that poof, it's legit. And so how many, abusive policies and laws and actions by government have been quote unquote justified by this necessary and proper clause there in the Constitution? But it's even with the Bill of Rights. But before going to the Bill of Rights, I just want to mention too, in the next section, Section 9, it says that the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended for public safety. Okay, so there again, all they have to do is say it's for safety, and boom, no habeas corpus. And then in the 13th Amendment, it says slavery is actually okay as punishment for a crime of someone who has been duly convicted. So all the government has to do is say, oh, well, we duly convicted you in our, kangaroo court or whatever. And it's legit. It says it right there in the old Bill of Rights, right there in the 13th Amendment, that slavery is A-okay as long as we duly convict you. So, again, I'm wanting to remind you of the theme here, which is simply that there are supposedly exceptions to the rule, and that rule, again, just being the non-abuse principle. In other words, that abuse is never acceptable. Slavery is never acceptable, ever, period. That's it. It's actually like an eternal evil for all time, under all circumstances. That's it. That's the law of this creation. It's always been that way. It always will be that way. And then in the 14th Amendment, we got that the state can deprive any person, the state can deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Oh, well, that sounds good, right? That sounds super legit. Again, you're just leaving it them to define what due process is. They can just say whatever they want it to be. What's due process? It's totally ambiguous. One group of politicians might think due process is one thing, another group can call it, another thing. It's a giant loophole. And again, the key thing to understand is that there should never be use of any language like this. It should never, whenever you read something that says like, the state can deprive any person of liberty if, fill in the blank, there's due process, or if they're duly convicted, or if it's an emergency, or if, there's a rebellion, or if whatever. anything that follows the word if in that sentence is going to not be a legit excuse because there are zero excuses. There are zero legit reasons. And like this is the main aha moment, like for someone waking up to what's wrong with the world and why, ethics actually matters is like, oh, so there's really no exceptions? Yes, really, none, including safety. Remember that they keep saying safety over and over as it because most people think that's a valid exception, but it's not. If you're being abused, you're not safe. This idea that you can like be abused into safety is a contradiction in terms. It's like voting for freedom. Gotta vote this election, vote for freedom. It's a contradiction in terms. You're supporting a system based on abuse, based on the violation of your freedom. So you can't promote freedom by supporting slavery. It really is that simple, but political science will have you believe otherwise just through enormous amounts of bullshit, basically. So that's just what I wanted to hit on in this talk to try and help make this ethical understanding of creation a little more clear. One other note here I have is that in the Declaration of Independence, which overall is a much better document than the Constitution, it does have a portion that says that a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So if you just read that quick, it might sound fine, except if you pay attention or focus in on that latter portion there, ruler of a free people. Again, that's a contradiction in terms. You can't have a free people that are being ruled. A ruler is someone who abusively controls others, right? Like that is the definition that should be utilized in this context. I'm not talking about, someone people voluntarily choose to be their, leader of a working group or whatever to build a house or something. We're talking about someone given the right to abuse, which is foolish and unethical. And right there in the Declaration of Independence, it says a tyrant is unfit to be a ruler, right? So that implies, though, that if you're not a tyrant, that it's possible to have a non-tyrannical ruler. But again, that's a contradiction in terms, and this is like the fundamental ethical blunders of the pro-politics, pro-statism view that just results in one continuous shitstorm, I guess is the right term, decade after decade, century after centuries, because people are trying to make the world a better place through evil means. They're trying to establish the good through evil. And again, the moral fabric of creation doesn't allow for that. So it's that simple. There's no loopholes. I hope this makes sense to one or two folks out there. All right, thanks for listening. Oh, and to just give a real important concrete example, besides all of the political examples, like disarming nonviolent people, like medical tyranny, right? Like violation of people's privacy through widespread surveillance, like through these major aggressive acts that are just carried out by government on a daily basis, including extortion, otherwise known as taxation. Another big example that's not as talked about that shows beyond any reasonable doubt that the world is run by evil, you could just say run by the devil, is the misinformation about health, for one. Just the fact that free speech is restricted to perhaps the greatest degree concerning health, right? Like they're the quickest to try and silence people saying anything about health that they don't agree with, whether you're warning people about something you think is dangerous to health or you're promoting something you find to actually be extremely beneficial for health, these are the things that are censored the most. So if the world was ruled by, the most gargantuan piece of shit in existence, in other words, Satan, that would be something he would uh, be very much involved in carrying out, undermining people's health. And so, for me, a very clear proof of this is just the lack of information on nutrition, right? So, like in Western medical schools, they're given almost no training on nutrition whatsoever. And then what they are told is to diagnose various symptoms as, various disorders that need artificial pharmaceuticals as the so-called cures, right? But not looking into the fact that many symptoms that people have, many negative health experiences people have, are due to nutrient deficiencies, right? So, like, it's somewhat commonly known that if you're completely deficient in vitamin C, you get this illness called scurvy, right? Well, there's various negative consequences for other vitamins and minerals and nutrients that the body needs, right? Like the body needs a certain number, which is about 40 based on my research. It's not like some unsolvable mystery of like how many nutrients does the body really need. It's about 40, not 400, not 4,000. And not only is there a lack of education of, so-called medical professionals, but of the general public, right? Like people are suffering, a lot of people are undoubtedly suffering from nutrient deficiencies, but they don't realize that because they go to the doctor and the doctor just says they have some disorder or disease or whatever, and here's your pharmaceutical cocktail, again, as the so-called solution, right? So the fact that like just the obvious clear solution of making sure everyone has like all the essential vitamins and minerals alone, right? Omega fatty acids, probiotics, right? Like just making sure your body has what it needs to work as it was designed to work, right? It's like trying to run a truck with, without oil in it, and then it breaks down, and like the world is so insane, it would be like saying, oh, there was a genetic flaw in the truck. It was something wrong with the design of the truck. It's like, no, the truck was actually designed just fine, but you didn't put oil in it, and so that's why it broke down. Like it really is that basic when it comes to nutrients. If you don't have these 40 or so vitamins and minerals, your body isn't going to be able to run as it was designed to do, right? So where is this education, right? Like why is it lacking, again, in the so-called medical profession, and why is it lacking in the general sphere of public knowledge, or whatever you want to call it? It's because the world is evil, and it's run by, again, evil, to the utmost degree. That's why. And not only do they not give information on basic nutrition, but they push the opposite of nutrition, which is toxins, right? Still to this day, mercury is put into the tooth fillings of children and people all around the world. This is one of the most toxic substances in the world, and it's put into people's mouths, and it dissolves over, continuously over time, and can even, break up and be swallowed. It's just completely insane, completely unnecessary. There's zero reason why you would need to fill a tooth with mercury. Zero. Like, if you think only this toxic substance is the only way to fill a tooth, like that's insane. It's definitely not how you have to fill a tooth. The fact that it was ever considered a good idea just shows how moronic the world is to accept this shit. And they will only do so, again, because they are idol worshippers who can't seem to fathom the idea that the most powerful people in the world are insane abusers, as they always have been. So Mercury, yeah, top example, along with fluoride being put in the water, and there's just all this misinformation about it. Oh, it's actually a natural mineral and it's good for you and blah, 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 good for your teeth. And when what they're putting in is a waste product that is in no way beneficial to the human body and has been proven even to lower IQ in children. It's just there's zero reason to put fluoride in the water supply. And on top of that, it's pushing a drug on people without their permission, which again would be criminal for one neighbor to do to another neighbor. Oh, but it's okay when they do it. It's okay when they just put a waste product, so-called nutrient, in the water supply that dumbs down the entire population. Oh, that's fine. Another great example is aspartame, another neurotoxin that's available for free on every diner table in America, right? These products like Sweet and Low, Equal, or whatever they're called, the colorful packets you see there on your diner table, have as many as you like, free of charge. Load up on it. Oh, drink your diet soda that's loaded up on it. Don't worry about it being a neurotoxin, drink up. That's totally fine, right? So, and then not to even mention like all of the air pollution, who knows, the thousands of different chemicals we're breathing in and all the products, that contain all these BPA and, ad infinitum chemicals that we're exposed to. It's just toxic overload to an extreme degree, while simultaneously neglecting to, educate people on basic nutrition and on these 40 vitamins and minerals, and like some in particular that have been shown to be especially positive, like vitamin B17, most people have never even heard of because it's been like um, called controversial, and like people have been steered away um, from knowing about it and even from ingesting it because it's naturally found in grape seeds, for example. But most grapes now don't even have seeds. They've been hybridized to not even have seeds in them. So, like key nutrients like that B vitamin, along with, potassium and magnesium and all the other vitamins, vitamin D3, on and on. It's safe to say that like majority of people are deficient in one or more of these 40 or so nutrients, but you're never going to hear about that from your doctor. You're never going to hear about that from your so-called, uh, government of caring overlords out there. And why? Why such craziness? Again, it's because the world is run by the ultimate abuser who empowers other abusers at the top of the pyramid. And that abuse can also be labeled slavery. And slavery is, again, an insane experience to be under. And so that's why everything is backwards, where they push things on you that are harmful and then they restrict your access to things that are beneficial. It's just that's the insanity of slavery. And that's what we're living under, even in the so called free world, because even here, millions of people are extremely naive and dumb about thinking that there's an exception to the rule. And so they think, oh, yeah, politicians having all the guns and making medical decisions for me. Oh, that's clearly the better way to go. That's the ethical stupidity that perpetuates this insanity and slavery and suffering. And one more final note, I listened to the previous audio and realized I slightly misspoke. And because so many people out there are demonically possessed POSs, I realized, well, they're just going to jump on this little minor flaw in what I said and, go off on this tangent and create their straw man. And that was when I said that there's never a valid reason to deny someone of their liberty. I followed by emphasizing again that what I was talking about was that there's no valid reason for abuse, that the non-abuse principle is eternal and there are no exceptions. Even if someone does something abusive, you don't actually have the right to be abusive back to them. But that doesn't mean you just let someone run amok that being abusive. Morons. Like if you were actually putting those words in my mouth, I just want to give a special shout out to you, a special FU to you, because that's not at all obviously what I was suggesting. It's just a complete straw man argument. If someone is being abusive towards you, you have the right to use defensive force to defend yourself or to defend others and stop them. So, say someone is swinging around a big chain and they're just, swinging it at people and their property and hurting people and damaging stuff. Of course, I'm not saying, oh, well, you can't deny him of his liberty to swing the chain around and hurt people. That's his divine right of liberty. Like, that's how fucking retarded the opposition is that I face and anyone else with, a decent sense of morality. It's not abuse to use defensive force. I shouldn't even have to say that because it's so obvious, but obviously for a lot of people, they need to be told the obvious. Defensive force is not the same as abuse. If someone is abusing you and you use defensive force to stop the abuse, you are not actually participating in abuse yourself. You're not denying someone of their liberty to not be abused. You're defending your own liberty to not be abused. Okay? So there's your clarification and destruction of your moronic straw man. All right. Thanks again for listening.